What is affordable housing all about? I mean, who's it for? I mean, people need a home to live in. I guess you'll find out very quickly because the show starts now. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to PWD Allies podcast. My name is Brent Frain. I'm the host for the show. I have Mike Morrice joining me from Kitchener, Ontario, and we're going to be talking about affordable housing and the solutions. Hello, Mike. How are you today?
I'm all right. It's good to be back with you both again. Thanks for having me on this show. What is this? You might know how many times it's been. It's been
It's
a whole
been
bunch,
it's been a
and
whole
I'm
bunch,
really
and
Lot.
we love each one of them. So we're so happy to have you on. Yeah,
well. Thanks for having me back again.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, affordable housing, definitely a hot topic, and affects every single person in the country, especially people on fixed income, low income earners. Corporate landlords have had their shot at corporate greed for way too long. I can relate to that because I rent from a corporate landlord, and I've had my hurdles dealing with affordability, trying to find another place to move to. Well, the corporate landlord doesn't want to drop the price down. Only $80. Well, I mean, would you rather have it rented or not? And so that's what I'm dealing with. The hurdles trying to find affordable housing. It is impossible in Canada.
I can tell you, like in my community, if you look back in the last 20 years or so, since 2005, we've seen rents double, while at the same time, the Ontario Disability Support Program has remained pretty much the same.
Hmm.
So, folks with disabilities who were in a tough position 20 years ago, when the cost of groceries and housing, again, when it comes to rents, have doubled, it means that that same person is so much further behind when the income supports haven't kept pace with the rising cost of living, and housing is where it's most pronounced. And so it's just gotten so much where you might have the numbers, Brent, for BC, and I imagine it's somewhat similar to the experience of folks with disabilities here in Ontario and in my community.
Yeah.
And it's a big reason why, you know, our advocacy for the Canada Disability Benefit will continue and is important, but it can't be separate from and without advocacy for addressing the housing crisis we're also in.
Well, and rent geared to income housing, Mike, like here in BC, I've kind of spitballed the numbers. I don't know how they're probably a little bit off, but more or less based on the research I've done, and I've figured out that probably of the people that are on PWD assistance here in BC, the provinces are actually only offering about 12% of RGI units to people with disabilities. So only 12% of those RGI units are actually being available to people with disabilities. So that means 88% aren't getting it.
Yet
Wow.
we know that it's 40% of those living in poverty are folks with disabilities.
Hmm.
So I guess it's a double injustice where the rates of poverty are so much higher amongst folks with disabilities, but those who are getting access to the housing we need are disproportionately not
Mhm.
serving those who might need it the most. And so that's why my team and I have been looking at and have put forward a new motion to try to address this issue.
Well,
Well, especially,
let's
yeah,
talk
yeah,
about your bill. Let's talk about
yeah,
your bill, Mike.
yeah, especially with the ones that are living in market housing, paying the market rent. I mean, they don't have access to, the rent geared to income. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely talked about your bill there, Mike.
Well, I guess you mentioned earlier, Brent, the corporate landlords. That is part of the issue, of course. And
Hmm.
it's been some time since I put forward a motion that would have taxed some of those large corporate investors appropriately. We could then use that money to build more of the affordable housing that we do need. And
Hmm.
so I want to be careful. There's not like there's one silver bullet,
Yeah.
but one of the issues that housing experts have been raising for some time now is where funds are getting directed for so-called affordable housing.
Hmm.
And in particular, I've been sharing the research of Carolyn Weitzman, who wrote a paper just a few months ago looking at the details of some of these funds. I'll share with you one of them as an example. So it's called the Affordable Housing Fund. It's got $15 billion allocated to it. But for someone to qualify to build under the Affordable Housing Fund, there are only criteria that require affordability for 30% of the units that are built.
Yeah. Yeah.
So right off the top, 70% of the units that are built in this so-called affordable housing fund
Yeah.
have no criteria at all.
That's
For
amazing.
but then it gets worse, because for the 30% that do have criteria, the criteria used isn't using the definition of affordable housing that the federal government has, which is a maximum of 30% of a person's income can go towards housing. Instead, this so-called affordable housing fund says that for the 30% that do have criteria, that criteria is that it has to be no more than 80% of median market rent.
Mm-hmm. Because there are some corporate landlords right now, like I've run against like 8 of them right now, on top of my head. And they basically say, well, we can rent to you as long as your income is no less than $60,000 a year. I like, say what? Your place is like $1,650,
Yeah.
1,600.
Well,
Like, yeah.
and if the federal government is then taking $15 billion, telling Canadians that it's going to an affordable housing fund,
Mhm.
and yet the 30% that they're putting any criteria around at all for the units that are built are 80% of market rent, well, rents in Kitchener just doubled, as I shared earlier.
Yeah.
And so 80% of market rent in Kitchener is very unaffordable for
Yeah.
most people, and definitely unaffordable for somebody who's getting ODSP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
The-
And
exactly.
so her research goes on to show that you look at some of the biggest funds. There's one called the Apartment Construction Loan Program. I think it's 3% of units built are actually for low-income families in core housing need.
Ooh.
Wow.
So this was the issue we were trying to solve with this motion, is looking at the research from housing experts,
Mm-hmm.
listening to the experiences of folks in my community and others across the country, to put forward that we should have definitions for affordable housing based on income.
Yeah.
You hit the nail
Yeah.
right on the head, because
I was just thinking
yeah,
too. I was just like, based on
because like, again, if we take our example here in BC, we have a premier David Eby, and he was all really happy. He's got this new initiative he rolled out a couple years ago called BC Builds, and he was really happy about it. And he says we're going to have all this money, like it's sort of like what is it, like a rolling line of credit,
Mm,
a rolling line of credit for all these new developers
mm.
with the province to build all these new affordable housing.
Yeah.
Well, um, there was some units that they built in Vancouver, and the affordable rents, or the affordable prices of I mean, they were like $3,500 a month, or $4,000 a. Is that affordable?
Yeah,
Is
for
that
who? Yeah,
affordable?
yeah, but that's the question, for who though?
Like, for who? For who is that affordable?
That's actually the exact same question that Professor Weitzman asks.
Yeah,
Who are we building these units for?
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I mean, somebody like a multi-billionaire. I mean, or is it somebody on ODSP or PWD across the country, whatever province they're in. And yeah, and that's the thing is, people just want a place they can call a safe place they can call home, that they can afford, and that it's not run down from like a corporate landlord who they just want it as a corporate, as an investment. They don't want to do any upkeep of the building. I mean, that's why you have your annual rent increase every year, right? That money's supposed to be going into keeping the place upgraded, but they're actually using it to give to their stakeholders, their investors, to keep them happy. And then as soon as you move out, they just flip it over and jack up the rent by $9,900 to $1,000. Now, next person comes in, oh my gosh, like now the rent's really high, and they just change the lock on the door and maybe give it a slap of paint, and there you go, it's all done. And I guess the question I have for you, Mike, is about affordable housing. Should it be geared to the individual or the household?
Well, what we're calling for in Motion 170 is that they'd have two income-based definitions.
Mhm.
One for deeply affordable and one for affordable.
That's a great
And
idea. Yeah.
the deeply affordable would say those who are making between 0 to 50% of the median income in that community.
Okay.
And then affordable would be those making between 50% to 120% of the median income in that community.
Mm.
And if it's an individual, then it would be based on that individual's income. The way CMHC currently uses definitions, and this might be something we need to talk about, is it would be household if there are more than one person in that household. Which I know with the CDB, we continue the advocacy to look at the individual's income and not the household's income.
Yes.
Yeah.
Here, it'd be looking at least to make sure that income definition is applied across the board, that you'd have a deeply affordable and affordable as the income-based definitions. They'd be clear, they'd be consistent for all programs to build so-called affordable housing. And that's what folks can find online. If they look up Motion 170, that's what I put forward just a few weeks ago.
I'm always so big on definitions. I mean, there's no point in saying something that we're going to make this affordable if you don't know what the definition of affordable is. Like for example, we did a podcast. It was a while ago called Boondoggle. I have a thumbnail. It just says Boondoggle on the thumbnail, and talking about the housing issue here in BC. And again, we talked about the median incomes for the average BC person. We're not even talking about you and me, Brent, in legislative poverty. We're talking about the median incomes for the average BCer is like $70,000. So even at $70,000, you're not going to be able to afford $3,000 or $4,000 rents.
No, and that's the problem. And I've run against that with places I've looked at. Just curious to find out, can you rent there? I mean, or what is your income requirements? And some of them are wondering, like, why am I asking that question? I feel, well, because I might be a potential tenant. I might want to rent there. Like, one place said you needed $84,000 in order to rent there, and the rent was $1,825. I said, well, that's more than a whole PWD check. PWD, persons with disabilities. Oh, okay. Well, if you're interested, you can always apply. And it quickly hung up the phone on me. Well, wait, that's discrimination, right?
Well, and I can give you some numbers from here in Waterloo Region.
Yeah.
So a person on ODSP, their shelter allowance is $556 a month. If you're working full time, making minimum wage, well, if you have 30% of your income going towards rent every month, 30% of that person's income, that is what would be affordable housing for that person, would be $905 a month.
Mm-hmm.
But the average rents here in Kitchener is $2,100 a month.
Yeah. That's what they are here
across the country. Well, for you both, it'd be higher, I bet, in the Vancouver area.
Yeah.
And across the country, it's just over $2,100. So if they're going to tie criteria to median rents, when median rents are completely in a different stratosphere than those who are in the greatest need, let alone folks in between.
Well, yeah, I mean,
so many people are just cut out altogether, and that's why it might sound kind of technical to start thinking, we need to talk about the definition of affordable housing. Well, it's not a semantic when that definition is being misused, or these criteria being then applied. That means that those who actually need the housing the most are getting cut out.
Exactly.
Especially if people are actually working at like 2 or 3 part-time jobs, a full-time job, and they're scared if they get sick, if they lose that one of those jobs, now they can't pay the bills, they can't pay the rent, or they have to choose between food or medication or whatever it may be. There's a problem in society where affordability, people should have the foundation. That should be a basic human right of just housing. Housing, you should have that. And if you can't have that, there's a problem, like a huge problem.
Yeah. We had a couple of questions in the lead up to you knowing that you were going to come on the show, Mike. We had a couple of questions from our fellow allies. One of them was when we had Dan on, he was talking about Doug Ford's strategy about basically suing people that were homeless, like charging them fines. people that were homeless. That was the one kind of comment is like, that's kind of stupid. So that was kind of one commentary. The other question we had from another ally of ours that is regular participant on the podcast, Alan Davies. He's a big proponent of tiny homes.
Oh, yes.
And I didn't know if you knew much about tiny homes, or if you thought that maybe the container homes is maybe a good strategy. What's your feeling about both of those things?
Well, we need a lot of different solutions being made available for folks. If you think
Mhm.
back to the 1970s, when 40% of all housing starts had federal assistance attached, and today it's some small fraction when only 3% of the total housing stock is social housing.
Mhm.
One of those solutions can be tiny homes. In Waterloo Region, we have a community called A Better Tent City. And this was started by a group of people. One of the three is somebody with lived experience of living unsheltered. And they have about 50 tiny homes now that are provided for folks. It's not without its challenges, but those are folks who had been living unsheltered prior to living at A Better Tent City. Other communities have sought to replicate that, and in fact, our regional government has also put in place kind of a tiny home type solution that is a bit more. It got more bureaucracy attached to it, I guess, because it's operated by a municipal government, but
Mhm.
inspired by what was done at A Better Tent City. And so, I guess I want to be careful. We don't want to let governments off the hook.
Yeah.
They need to be doing far more, far faster, and investing uh, in much more significant ways. And people like me need to be listening to those with lived experience. And there are a number of folks I can say in Waterloo Region for whom A Better Tent City is kind of an ideal place for them. And so we've seen some success with it here. And if you're seeing kind of similar over there and you're listening to people with lived experience also, I'm quite grateful for what the team at A Better Tent City has done and has provided for folks who live there. And certainly I know the demand in our community, I don't think I've shared these numbers yet, but the number of people living unsheltered in Waterloo Region, it tripled from 2018 to the point in time
Wow,
count that was done in 2021, from just
that's
over 300 to
crazy.
over 1,000. That's
Wow.
totally like it's so devastating. But then they did the most recent one just a few weeks ago, and it almost tripled again from 1,000 people living unsheltered to just over 2,400, and that's only those that there's so many who are living unsheltered and might not be counted. Um, and
Yeah.
so it's pretty clear that we need more of everything, and tiny homes are one of those solutions that needs to be brought forward. But we're in like a 30-year gap of the investments required from federal and provincial governments, and we're certainly not going to solve that by criminalizing poverty. And so it does disturb me what we're hearing from people like Premier Ford. Um, as a federal MP, he and I don't sit in the same legislature, and so I focus my advocacy federally, where they actually have the largest budgets. But my friend Aisling Clancy is our MPP, your MLA equivalent out in BC, and she has no shortage of concerns with some of the actions taken by the Ford government here in Ontario.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Like the tent cities have been forming, I mean, rapidly across the country, and I'm just devastated to hear, that it has to be that way, and because it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, providing people with dignified home, like dignified respect, and giving them the homes that they need, because the numbers keep growing. They won't get shorter. Definitely not. If
Legislated poverty is a choice, right? Legislated
well,
poverty is a choice.
yeah, and like a community, like I understand like why people were congregating into like small communities with tents, because they want to feel belonged. They want to feel that their neighbors are going to be protecting each other. And I can relate to in Victoria, British Columbia, Mike. It's called Pandora, right? And people that live in Victoria, they know, okay, Pandora. It's it's not exactly the most inviting scene to walk through. They have a government office that's right there. It's all fenced up all around it. It's not inviting to go to. And unfortunately, there's the people that are homeless on the streets. There's no public washrooms they're allowed to go into. So unfortunately they're having to, just be they just go where they need to go. And I won't be getting the graphics. It's sad. It's really sad because it doesn't have to go that way. I did speak to a couple people just about 4 days ago. And I talked about this on the podcast about that, but I'm going to mention it to you though, Mike. Like the stories that I'm hearing, and I said, all I can do is advocate and push the policymakers, city, provincially, federally, and bring it to their attention that it's not okay. And they actually thanked me. I said, like I do a podcast, persons with disabilities, and I said I bring on their allies, people with lived experience, and I said I'll carry their story forward. And the story was that they just want a safe place they can call home. And they said what the city's doing is that they're putting fencing up and pushing them along to another area. And they said, we won't get the self-help that we need. And the city's saying, well, we're getting all people from encampments from other cities coming over to our city, and we don't know what to do. So now they're blaming their mayors, saying, take the accountability, keep in your ball court, deal with it. And I agree. Like every city should be dealing with their own stuff. But I also say that provincial governments from all angles across the country and feds definitely need to take ownership of it, right? They've created the mess. They need to clean up the mess and put in the housing solutions that they had from the start. I mean, social housing, co-op housing, subsidized housing. I mean, like the list goes on.
Well, that might be a good place for me just to share my thanks, because I need to step away in the next few minutes.
Sure.
I really appreciate what you both have done to open up the conversation and truthfully to keep me accountable along the way. You joined for a session we had with some members of the local disability community here in Waterloo Region, virtually, of course, this past summer. I do think that accountability is so important, but so is space for conversations like these with myself and so many others that you both have hosted on the show over the last year. And so, Neil and Brent, I really appreciate what you've done to create space for these conversations. Please know our advocacy needs to continue because of what is not in the fall economic statement. We do not see the disability benefit fixed in that document. It remains to be below the poverty line. And so with the last gasps of this parliament that remain, I don't have a ton of, I don't want to give false hope. It's not functioning particularly well. And the advocacy remains to be so important. And that's what I'm going to continue to call for, both leading up to and now afterwards, is for them to fix the Canada Disability Benefit while also addressing the housing crisis in much more substantial ways. But I really appreciate you both for just having conversations like these that are so important. I'm glad, Neil, we got at least to a few of the questions from folks as well.
That's good. And I wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas as well, Mike.
I
want to wish season to you.
I want a very, very Merry Christmas to you, Mike. It's always a pleasure having you on the podcast. And Mike, I got some really wonderful news for you, though. I mean, you would be quite delighted to hear this. I've shared this before with Neil. Neil knows what's going on. But we're going to be expanding our advocacy in February this coming year, 2025. Jeff Leggett, Sonia, and myself are going to be making our way out to Ottawa on February the 4th. And our petitions are going to be read in the House of Commons. So we're going to be there for a couple of days.
Well, would love to see you when you're in Ottawa. Please let me know. That's really exciting. So glad to hear.
They've got some seats set aside for us in the House of Commons. They're going to be reading petitions E5047. That was mine and Neil's petition, and then there's another one that Jeff's
the Spider-Man one.
Yeah, so they're going to be reading. Laura Collins is going to me it out, and Alistair McGregor. So it's
right on.
Anyway,
well,
cheers,
I'll watch
cheers,
for
Mike.
that. Happy holidays to you both and to your listeners too.
Take care. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for coming.
You bet.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.